I'm Augusta Dubois, 82 years old, a woman, and I came home to find my own daughter had helped my grandson break into my bedroom. Not just any room, but my sanctuary. The room I had shared with my husband, Robert, for 54 years. The room where his scent still lingered on the cedar chest in the corner, where our wedding portrait hung on the wall, a testament to a life built on trust and mutual respect. A life that, in one afternoon, felt like it had been bulldozed by the very people I thought I was protecting and nurturing under my own roof. My name is Augusta, and this is the story of how I had to teach my own family the meaning of the word home. It all started, I suppose, the day my daughter Brenda moved back in. Her husband, a good but financially reckless man, had passed away suddenly, leaving her with a mountain of debt and two children on the cusp of adulthood. Tiffany was 20, already a serious and responsible soul, working part-time while attending community college. Marcus was 17, and even then, he had a way of sucking all the air out of a room, making it his own. He was Brenda's sun and moon, and in her eyes, he could do no wrong. I loved them all, of course. You don't stop loving your child or your grandchildren. But love and blindness are two different things, and I have always had 20/20 vision when it comes to character. I opened my home to them without a second thought. This house, the one Robert and I built with money we saved by living on love and canned beans for 5 years, was big, far too big for one old woman. It had 4 bedrooms, a large yard where Robert's roses still bloomed every June, and a foundation built not just on concrete but on decades of laughter, tears, and unwavering commitment. It felt right to fill its quiet halls with family again. At first, it was a comfort. The sound of footsteps on the stairs, the smell of Brenda's cooking, even if she did use too much salt, it was a balm to my lonely heart. But slowly, like a creeping vine, the dynamic began to shift. The house began to feel less like a shared haven and more like a territory being quietly conquered. The first clear sign was about a year after they moved in. Marcus had just turned 19 and was obsessed with getting a car. Not just any car, but a slightly used sports coupe he'd seen on a lot downtown. It was flashy and impractical and, most importantly, expensive. Brenda came to me, her voice full of that carefully constructed helplessness she'd mastered over the years. "Mama," she'd said, wringing her hands, "Marcus is just so down. All his friends are driving and he feels trapped. It's affecting his confidence." I looked at my daughter, a woman of 54, and saw the same pleading girl who used to beg for a new doll she didn't need. I knew Marcus didn't need a car, he had a bus pass, and his part-time job was only a few miles away. Tiffany, for her part, took 2 buses and a train to get to her classes and her job at the library, and I never heard a single word of complaint from her. But Brenda pressed on, talking about how a car would help him be more responsible, how he could run errands. It was all nonsense, of course, we both knew it, but the weight of a daughter's pleading is a heavy thing. In the end, I relented. I took a significant sum from the savings Robert and I had carefully built, the money earmarked for property taxes and the inevitable repairs an old house demands, and I bought Marcus that car. The look on his face when Brenda gave him the keys was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. Not gratitude, but triumph. As if he had won a battle he was always entitled to win. He gave me a quick, careless hug and spent the rest of the evening taking his friends for joyrides. 2 weeks later, Tiffany's bus pass was about to expire. I had overheard her on the phone, quietly telling a friend she'd have to cut back her hours at the library because she couldn't afford the new monthly pass until her next paycheck. My heart ached. The next morning, I went to the station and bought her a pass that was good for the entire semester. When I gave it to her, her eyes filled with genuine tears. She wrapped her arms around my neck and held on so tight I could feel the sincerity in her bones. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered into my shoulder. "You have no idea how much this helps." I did know, and I also knew the profound, sinking difference between the reactions of my two grandchildren. One saw my help as a lifeline, the other saw it as his due, and my own daughter couldn't or wouldn't see the difference. The years that followed settled into a pattern. Life was lived on two separate tracks within the same house. On one track was Tiffany and me. We shared quiet mornings, sipping coffee and reading the paper. We tended to Robert's roses together, our conversations easy and comfortable. She would tell me about her classes, about the interesting people she met at the library, about her dream of becoming a social worker. She respected the rhythm of the house, the history held within its walls. She always knocked, she always cleaned up after herself, she always asked before borrowing so much as a postage stamp. On the other track were Brenda and Marcus. Theirs was a world of hushed, urgent conversations in the kitchen that would stop the moment I entered. It was a world of takeout containers left on the counter, of loud music thumping through the floorboards from Marcus's room, of a constant, unspoken pressure. Brenda began making comments, at first casually, then with increasing frequency. "This old house is just so much work for you, Mama," she'd say, watching me dust the mantelpiece. "You should be resting, not worrying about all this." It sounded like concern, but underneath it, I heard the hum of suggestion. Then the comments became more pointed. "Marcus really needs a bigger room if he's going to have space for his computer setup. The one he has is hardly bigger than a closet." She would say this while glancing pointedly down the hall toward my bedroom, the largest in the house. I would just smile and change the subject. "The closet was big enough for you when you were his age," I'd say lightly, and she would fall silent, a flicker of resentment in her eyes. The unspoken truth was that this was my house, mine and Robert's. Every nail, every floorboard was a piece of our shared history. My bedroom wasn't just a room, it was the heart of that history. It overlooked the backyard, where we'd hosted countless family barbecues. It held the big mahogany bed we'd bought with our first real savings. It held my jewelry box, which contained not just pearls and old brooches, but my mother's wedding ring and a lock of my first baby's hair. It was a sacred space. The pressure intensified about 2 months before the incident. Brenda started asking about finances. "Mama, are you sure you're managing okay? That pension from the city can't be much." She knew full well that Robert had been a careful planner. "We weren't rich, but we were secure." "I'm doing just fine, Brenda," I'd tell her firmly. Robert made sure of that. This was never the answer she wanted. She and Marcus had woven a fantasy for themselves, a belief that I was sitting on some hidden fortune, a dragon guarding a pile of gold. They couldn't understand that my wealth wasn't in a bank account. It was in the deed to this house, free and clear, and in the peace of mind that came with it. Marcus, now 21, was becoming more brazen. He had lost his part-time job for, as he put it, creative differences with the manager, which I translated as showing up late too many times. He was always asking for money: $50 for gas for the car I bought him, $100 for a new video game, $200 for a weekend trip with friends. Brenda was his willing accomplice, his advocate. "He's just trying to find himself, Mama," she'd plead after I'd turned Marcus down. "It's hard for young men these days." I wanted to tell her that it was hard for young women too, like her daughter, who was working 20 hours a week while maintaining a 4 GPA, but I knew it was useless. In Brenda's world, Marcus's struggles were epic tragedies, while Tiffany's successes were quiet, expected footnotes. A week before it happened, the unease in my spirit grew into a palpable dread. I was in the kitchen preparing a pot of soup when Brenda came in. She didn't look at me, just started opening and closing cabinets. "You know, Mama," she said, her back to me, "I was just thinking about Daddy's old things. Did he ever write anything down, about his wishes for the family?" My blood ran cold. Robert's wishes were perfectly clear, laid out in a will that had been read and executed years ago. She knew this. The house was mine until I passed, at which point it was to be sold and the proceeds divided equally between my children. It was simple, it was fair. "Brenda," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "your father's wishes are an illegal document at the lawyer's office. As you well know, we don't need to speak of it." She slammed a cabinet door, a little too hard to be accidental. "I was just asking," she muttered and left the room. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt different. The familiar creaks and groans that had always been a comfort now sounded like whispers. I got up and walked down the hallway. As I passed Marcus's room, I heard his voice, low and angry. "It has to be in there, in their room. Where else would she keep it?" I couldn't hear Brenda's reply, only a soft, shushing murmur. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Their room. They weren't talking about the past. They were talking about the present. They were talking about my room. My hand went to the doorknob of my bedroom, and for the first time in 54 years, I felt the urge to lock it from the inside. I went back to bed, but not to sleep. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the whispers in the walls of my own home. The day it happened was a Tuesday. Every Tuesday afternoon for the last 15 years, I've gone to my church group. We quilt, we talk, and we drink lukewarm coffee. It's a gentle ritual, a fixed point in my week. I left the house at 1 o'clock, same as always. I waved goodbye to Brenda, who was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone. Marcus was still in his room, presumably sleeping. Tiffany was at class, the house was quiet. As I drove to the church, a strange feeling came over me. It was a cold, heavy sensation in the pit of my stomach, the kind of premonition that old folks like me learn not to ignore. The whispers from the night before echoed in my mind. It has to be in there. I thought of Brenda's questions, of the resentment simmering just beneath her skin. I thought of Marcus's entitled impatience. I pulled into the church parking lot and sat there for a moment, the engine idling. I saw my friends, Martha and Jean, waving at me from the entrance to the fellowship hall. I should have gone in. I should have sat down, picked up my quilting square, and let the familiar rhythm of the afternoon soothe my nerves. But I couldn't. The feeling was too strong, a silent alarm ringing in my soul. "I'm sorry, Lord," I whispered to the empty car, "but I have to go back." I put the car in reverse and pulled out of the parking lot. The drive home took 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. With every red light, my anxiety grew. I was being foolish, I told myself. A silly old woman spooked by a late-night whisper. What could possibly happen in the span of an hour? But the feeling wouldn't leave me. I pulled into my driveway and immediately knew something was wrong. The front door was closed but not fully latched. It was open just a crack, which was strange. I was meticulous about locking that door. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Silence, a thick, unnatural silence. "Brenda," I called out, no answer. "Marcus," nothing. I walked through the living room, everything in its place. The kitchen was empty save for a coffee mug Brenda had left on the table. It was the stillness of the house that was so unnerving. It felt hollowed out, violated. I walked down the hallway, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. I passed Tiffany's room, door closed. I passed Marcus's room, door closed. Then I came to my room. And I stopped breathing. The door was pushed shut, but it wasn't closed properly. The wood of the door jamb right next to the lock set was splintered. There were fresh, white scratches in the dark paint, and a small sliver of wood lay on the floor. Someone had forced the lock. They had jimmied it open with something hard, probably a screwdriver from the toolbox in the garage. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My mind couldn't quite process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't a stranger. A stranger would have broken a window. A stranger would have been messy, obvious. This was calculated. This was intimate. This was an inside job. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. The room was a disaster, not a violent disaster, but a methodical, searching one. The drawers of my dresser were pulled out, their contents rummaged through but not dumped on the floor. The lid of the cedar chest, Robert's chest, was open. The neatly folded blankets and old photograph albums inside had been tossed aside. On my bedside table, the small drawer where I kept my checkbook and some important papers was ajar. And on my bed, the contents of my jewelry box were spilled across the quilt. They hadn't taken much. My pearls were still there, as was an old gold watch. They weren't common thieves. They hadn't been looking for things to pawn. They had been looking for something specific. They had been looking for the imaginary treasure they believed I was hiding: cash, bonds, a secret will. They had been searching for the key to a life they felt they deserved, a life they were too impatient to earn. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, the springs groaning under my weight. I looked at the wedding portrait on the wall. Robert and I, young and full of hope, staring out at a future we thought we understood. A cold, profound emptiness washed over me. The whispers in the walls had become a roar, and I had come home to find my sanctuary ransacked, not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. The shock held me captive for I don't know how long. I just sat there surrounded by the quiet chaos of my violated space. The air itself felt tainted. Then the silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening and closing again. Footsteps, slow and hesitant, came down the hall. Tiffany, she appeared in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes took in the scene, the splintered door jamb, the open drawers, me sitting on the bed, and her face CR. Lumpled. "Oh, Grandma," she breathed, dropping her bag. She rushed to my side, her young, warm hands covering my own cold ones. What happened? I couldn't speak at first. I just shook my head, a single tear tracing a path down my wrinkled cheek. I didn't need to ask who had done it. I knew, but I needed to hear it. I needed the final, brutal confirmation. I looked into my granddaughter's honest, sorrowful eyes. "Tiffany," I said, my voice a dry whisper, "tell me the truth." Tears welled in her eyes and began to spill over. I'm so sorry, Grandma, she sobbed, her words muffled by her hands. I heard them this morning after you left. I was in my room studying and I heard them in the hallway, Mom and Marcus. He was saying he knew you kept cash somewhere in here and she told him to be quick about it. She said she'd keep watch from the kitchen window. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I should have called you. I should have done something. Her confession was a knife in my heart, but it was a clean wound. The truth, however painful, is always cleaner than a lie. I pulled her into a hug, stroking her hair. It's not your fault, child. It's not your burden to carry. But inside, a cold, hard anger was beginning to form, displacing the shock. It was an anger born of the deepest betrayal imaginable. My daughter, my own child, had not only allowed this, she had encouraged it. She had stood guard while her son desecrated my room. At that moment, we heard the sound of Marcus's sports car pulling into the driveway, followed by the front door opening. "We're back," Brenda called out, her voice unnaturally cheerful. I squeezed Tiffany's hand. "Stay here," I said, my voice low and steady. I stood up, my back straight, and walked out of the bedroom, leaving the door wide open for them to see. I met them in the living room. Brenda was holding a bag of groceries, a placid smile on her face. Marcus was behind her, looking bored. The smile on Brenda's face vanished when she saw the look on mine. "Mama, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen worse," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I've seen what my own family does when they think I'm not looking. I'd like for both of you to come with me." I turned and walked slowly back down the hall to my bedroom. I could hear their footsteps behind me, hesitant now. I stood in the doorway and gestured inside. "Would either of you care to explain this?" Brenda gasped, putting a hand to her mouth in a perfect performance of shock. "Oh my heavens, Mama, what happened? Were we robbed?" Marcus just stared, his face a blank mask, but I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Stop it, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through her act. "Just stop it. There was no robbery. The only thieves in this house are standing right in front of me." Brenda's feigned shock melted away, replaced by defensive anger. "What are you talking about? How dare you accuse us? We just got home." "I came home early," I said, pinning her with my gaze. "I saw the door and Tiffany heard you. She heard everything." At the mention of Tiffany's name, Brenda's face hardened. She shot a look of pure venom toward the bedroom where Tiffany was now standing, her face pale. The mask was completely off. "So that's it," Brenda hissed. "Your perfect little spy. You've always favored her." "This isn't about favoritism, Brenda, and you know it," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "This is about right and wrong. This is about respect. You helped your son break into my room, my private space. What were you looking for?" This is when the poison of justification began to flow. "We were worried about you," Brenda cried, her voice climbing into a shrill, victimized whine. "We thought maybe you weren't thinking clearly. We were looking for documents for your will to make sure everything was in order." Marcus, emboldened by his mother's lies, finally spoke up. His tone was sullen, aggrieved. "Yeah, and what's the big deal anyway? It's just a room. We didn't even take anything. We were just trying to find out what Grandpa Robert wanted. You're always so secretive about money. You're hiding things from us, your own family." I stared at him, at this boy I had bounced on my knee, at this young man whose every whim had been catered to. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of his words struck me silent for a moment. They hadn't found what they were looking for, so in their minds, no crime had been committed. Their violation of my trust, of my privacy, of my soul, that was irrelevant. They felt entitled not only to my possessions, but to my very thoughts. They believed they had the right to search my life for whatever they felt was theirs. "Get out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What?" Brenda asked, taken aback. "Get out of my sight," I repeated, my voice growing stronger. "Both of you, go to your rooms. I can't even stand to look at you right now." They stood there for a s. Econ, stunned, before Brenda grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him away, muttering about my senility and ingratitude. I was left standing in the hallway with Tiffany, the open wound of my bedroom yawning beside us. The confrontation hadn't brought catharsis or remorse. It had brought excuses and accusations. They had felt no guilt, only the anger of being caught, and that, I realized, was the deepest betrayal of all. The days that followed were the longest of my life. The house, once a place of comfort, became a cold and silent prison. Brenda and Marcus confined themselves to their rooms, emerging only for food, which they took back to their dens like scolded animals. There were no apologies, no acknowledgments, just a thick, suffocating silence punctuated by the slam of a door or the sound of the television from behind Brenda's room. They were waiting, I realized, waiting for me to get over it. Waiting for the old, accommodating Augusta to resurface, to smooth things over and pretend it never happened. But she was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized, a woman hollowed out by grief and fear. I spent most of my time in my bedroom. I had Tiffany help me wedge a chair under the doorknob at night, a pathetic defense that nonetheless felt necessary. My sanctuary now felt like a cage. I couldn't escape the image of their hands on my things, their greedy eyes searching my past for profit. I found myself lost in memories. I would sit in the armchair by the window for hours, staring out at Robert's rose garden now slightly overgrown. I could almost see him out there, his strong back bent over the soil, his hands caked with dirt, carefully tending to each bush. He was a man of quiet strength and absolute integrity. He believed a person's word was their bond, and that family was a sacred trust. What would he think of this? What would he say if he could see his daughter, his own Brenda, behaving with such dishonor? The weight of his absence felt heavier than ever. I took the cedar chest and opened it again. This time I was the one searching. I ran my fingers over the old photo albums, the pages brittle with age. There was Brenda as a little girl, a gap-toothed smile on her face, holding her father's hand at a 4th of July picnic. There was Marcus as a baby, a chubby, happy infant cradled in Robert's arms. Where did it all go so wrong? Was it my fault? Did I love Brenda too much, give her too much, so that she never learned to stand on her own 2 feet? Did I allow her to spoil Marcus so completely that he grew into a man with a void where his conscience should be? These questions circled in my mind, a relentless, tormenting chorus. I felt a profound loneliness, a sense of being utterly adrift. My family was just down the hall, but I had never felt more alone. They saw me not as a mother or a grandmother, but as an obstacle, an old woman clinging to a house and a past they wanted to claim as their own. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. I was 82 years old. What was I to do? Kick them out? My own daughter and grandson. The thought was terrifying. The shame, the talk it would cause in the family, at the church. And where would they go? Despite everything, a part of me, the mother in me, still felt a crippling sense of responsibility for them. So I did nothing. I retreated. I ate my meals alone in my room, usually something simple that Tiffany would bring me. She was my only lifeline. She would sit with me, not saying much, just being present, her quiet solidarity a small candle in the suffocating darkness. She would tell me about her day, and for a few minutes I could almost forget the ugliness that now lived in my house. But then she would leave, and the silence would rush back in, and I would be alone again with my memories and my fear. One evening, I was looking at the wedding portrait again. Robert and me, we were so young, I remembered the day it was taken. We had just signed the papers for the plot of land this house now stood on. We had nothing but a dream and each other. Robert had turned to me, his eyes shining, and said, "Gussie, we're going to build a fortress. Not of stone, but of love and respect. A place where our family will always be safe." A single tear rolled down my cheek and fell onto my hand. A fortress. The walls were still standing, but the foundation of love and respect had been eroded from within. I felt like I had failed him. I had let our fortress be breached by the very people it was meant to protect. That night, as I wedged the chair under the doorknob, I felt a despair so deep it was physical. I felt like giving up. Maybe Brenda was right. Maybe I was just a foolish old woman living in the past, taking up too much space. Maybe I should just give them what they wanted and find a small apartment, a quiet place to wait out my remaining years. The thought was a surrender, and in the darkness of my room, it felt like the only option left. I was at M. Y lowest point a few days later. I hadn't left my room for almost 72 hours except to use the bathroom. I felt weak, fragile. The will to fight had seeped out of me, leaving behind only a residue of sorrow. I was sitting in my armchair, the curtains drawn, when a soft knock came at the door, not the hesitant knock of someone who was afraid, but a firm, gentle rap. "Grandma?" It was Tiffany. "It's open," I said, my voice hoarse. I hadn't pushed the chair under the knob that morning. I no longer had the energy. She came in carrying a small tray. On it was a steaming cup of chamomile tea and a plate with 2 buttered pieces of toast, the crusts cut off just the way I like it. She set the tray down on the small table beside me. She didn't say anything about the drawn curtains or the uneaten meals from the day before. She just pulled up a small stool and sat at my feet, looking up at me with an expression of profound love and concern. Grandma, she said softly, I need to tell you something. I braced myself for more bad news, but her next words weren't about Brenda or Marcus, they were about me. When I was little, she began, I used to think you were a queen. This house was your castle, and you were the strongest, wisest person in the world. You taught me how to read. You taught me how to plant a garden. You taught me that a person's character is the only thing they truly own. She paused, taking my hand in hers. Her hand was so warm, so full of life. I know what they did hurt you. It hurt me too to see it. But the woman they did that to, the woman who has been hiding in this room for days, that's not my grandmother. My grandmother is Augusta Dubois. She is not a victim. She is not weak. She doesn't let bullies win. Her words were like a splash of cold, clean water on my face. They were simple, but they carried the undeniable force of truth. She saw a strength in me that I had forgotten I possessed. That woman is gone, Tiffany, I whispered, shaking my head. I'm just a tired old lady. No, she said, her grip on my hand tightening. She's not gone, she's just tired, and she's sad, but she's still in there. Think about Grandpa Robert. What would he say right now? Would he tell you to give up your home? To let them walk all over his memory? Or would he tell you to stand up and be the queen I always knew you were? Her invocation of Robert's name was a lightning strike to my soul. She was right, Robert would never have stood for this. He would never have tolerated such blatant disrespect, such profound dishonor in his home. He would have faced it head on, not with rage, but with unshakable resolve. He would have expected the same from me. In that moment, looking at my granddaughter's fierce, loving face, I felt a flicker of the old fire returning. The sorrow and fear didn't vanish, but they were joined by something else. A cold, clear, righteous anger. Tiffany was right. I was Augusta Dubois. I was the matriarch of this family, the keeper of this fortress. And it was time I started acting like it. You're right, child, I said, and my voice was different, stronger. I sat up straighter in my chair. You are absolutely right. I picked up the teacup and took a long sip. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away some of the chill. I then picked up a piece of toast and ate it, the simple act feeling like a declaration of war. For the rest of the day, a new energy coursed through me. After Tiffany left for work, I opened the curtains, letting the afternoon sun stream into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I tidied the drawers and put my jewelry back in its box. I made my bed, smoothing the quilt with firm, deliberate motions. I was reclaiming my space piece by piece. Then I sat down at my writing desk. I took out a piece of fine, cream-colored stationery, the kind I reserved for important correspondence, and I began to make a list. I didn't write down grievances or emotions. I wrote down facts. I wrote down rules. I wrote down consequences. My handwriting, which had been shaky for days, was now firm and clear. After I finished writing, I made a phone call. It was to Samuel Reed, the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate. I explained the situation to him in a calm, concise manner. I wasn't asking for his emotional support, I was asking for legal clarity. I asked him to draft a formal residential agreement, a document that would turn my daughter and grandson from entitled occupants into official tenants with rights and, more importantly, with responsibilities. I wanted it to be ironclad. He listened patiently, and when I was done, he said, Augusta, I am so sorry you're going through this, but I've known you for 30 years. I knew they picked the wrong woman to mess with. I'll have the documents drawn up by tomorrow. Hanging up the phone, I felt a sense of profound calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I knew what I had to do. The calm. In confrontation would be difficult, but it was necessary. I was no longer fighting for just a room. I was fighting for my dignity, for Robert's legacy, and for the soul of my family. I was going to remind them who I was. The next evening, I set the stage. I waited until Brenda, Marcus, and Tiffany were all home. I didn't shout or make a scene. I went to each of their doors and knocked. Brenda, I said through her closed door, please meet me in the dining room in 5 minutes. It's a family matter. I did the same with Marcus and Tiffany. The dining room was a room we rarely used anymore. It was for holidays and special occasions. The long, dark wood table polished to a high shine was the centerpiece. Robert had always sat at the head of the table. No one had sat there since he passed. Tonight, I took his seat. I placed 3 documents, fresh from the lawyer's office, face down on the table in front of me. They trickled in one by one. Tiffany came first, giving me a small, encouraging nod. Then came Brenda and Marcus, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and sullen defiance. They saw me sitting at the head of the table and they stopped short. The symbolism was not lost on them. "Sit down," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority. They hesitated, then slowly took their seats, Brenda and Marcus on one side, Tiffany on the other. I let the silence hang in the air for a full minute, looking at each of them in turn. Finally, I folded my hands on the table and began to speak. "We are going to have a conversation," I said, my voice even and measured. "And for the first time in a long time, you are going to listen. When I am finished, you will have a choice to make." I looked directly at Brenda and Marcus. "A few days ago, you broke into my room, you violated my home and my trust in the most profound way possible, and when you were confronted, you showed no remorse. You offered only excuses and accusations. You seem to be under the impression that your wants are more important than my rights. You seem to believe that this house, my home, is merely a resource for you to exploit. You are mistaken." I paused, letting the words sink in. "This house," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "was built by the love and hard work of two people. Me and your father, Brenda, your grandfather, Marcus, we sacrificed for this home. We poured our youth and our strength into its foundation. It is not just a collection of wood and bricks. It is a legacy, and you have treated it and me with contempt." Brenda started to speak. "Mama, that's not fair." "I am not finished," I said, my voice cutting her off like a blade. She fell silent, her mouth open. "You spoke of what Robert would have wanted. Let me be crystal clear about what Robert would have wanted. He would have wanted his family to act with honor. He would have wanted his wife to be treated with respect in her own home. He would have been ashamed, deeply and profoundly ashamed." I looked at Marcus. "You feel that you are owed something, that life has been unfair to you, and that you deserve more? The world does not owe you a thing, young man. Everything of value in this life is earned. Respect, security, happiness. You earn them with your character and your actions have been disgraceful." Tears were now silently streaming down Tiffany's face. Brenda and Marcus just stared at me, their faces pale and stunned. They had never seen this version of me. "So now we come to the choice," I said, sliding the documents across the table toward them. "I have had our lawyer draw up a formal residential agreement, a lease. You will find it outlines a new set of rules for living in my home. It includes a modest monthly rent to contribute to bills and upkeep. It includes a strict code of conduct which outlines my non-negotiable right to privacy, peace, and quiet. It requires you to be responsible for your own spaces and to contribute to the household chores. It states in no uncertain terms that this is my property and you are here as my guests, a privilege that can and will be revoked." I leaned forward. "You have two options. You can sign this agreement and we can begin to try very slowly to rebuild a family based on mutual respect and clear boundaries, or you can refuse to sign, in which case you will have 30 days to vacate my house. The choice is entirely yours." The silence in the room was absolute. Brenda picked up the document with a trembling hand. Marcus just stared at it as if it were a snake. They looked at each other, a silent, panicked communication passing between them. The real world, with all its consequences, had finally crashed their party. They saw their comfortable arrangement, their subsidized life, evaporating before their eyes. The power had shifted completely and irrevocably. After a long, tense moment, Brenda picked up the pen I had placed on the table. With a shaky hand, she signed H. Her name, then she pushed the paper toward Marcus. He glared at me, his eyes full of resentment, but it was the impotent resentment of a defeated bully. He snatched the pen and scribbled his signature. I took the documents back and slid one copy over to Tiffany. "You, my dear," I said, my voice softening for the first time, "are exempt. You are and always have been a true and respectful member of this household. This is for your records so you know the new rules." I stood up from the head of the table. "Good, the arrangements are now clear. Dinner is at 7. We will all eat together at this table from now on." I turned and walked out of the dining room, my back straight, leaving them to sit in the heavy silence of their consequences. The fortress was secure once more. The story doesn't end there, of course. A signature on a piece of paper doesn't magically heal a wounded heart or erase years of dysfunction. The weeks and months that followed were awkward and strained, but they were different. There was a new, grudging respect in the way they spoke to me. The whispers stopped. My bedroom door remained open and untouched. It was a beginning. I learned a painful lesson at 82 years old. I learned that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who require the clearest, strongest boundaries. I learned that you cannot command love, but you absolutely must command respect, especially from those who share your blood and live under your roof. You have to be willing to be the queen of your own castle, even if you're reigning over a fractured kingdom. My name is Augusta Dubois, and that's my story. Thank you for listening.